It was 7 o'clock in the evening, and Nikolai Vsevolatovich was sitting alone in his study, his favorite room from long past, lofty, spread with carpets, filled with somewhat heavy. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, and Nikolai Vsevolatovich was sitting alone in his study, his favorite room from long past, lofty, spread with carpets, filled with somewhat heavy, old-fashioned furniture. He sat in the corner on the sofa, dressed as if to go out, but he did not seem to be going anywhere. On the table before him stood a lamp with a shade. The sides and corners of this big room remained in shadow. His look was pensive and concentrated, not altogether at ease. His face was tired and had grown somewhat thin. He was indeed suffering from a swollen cheek, but the rumor about the knocked-out tooth was exaggerated. The tooth had been loosened, but was now firm again. The lower lip had also been cut inside, but this too had healed. It had taken a week for the swelling to go down, only because he did not want to receive the doctor and have him lance the abscess, but waited until it broke of itself. Not just the doctor, he would scarcely even admit his mother, and then only for a moment, once a day, and inevitably at dusk when it was already dark, but before the lights had been brought in. He did not receive Peter Stepanovich either, who nevertheless ran by 2 or 3 times a day while he was still in town to see Varvara Petrovna. And then at last on Monday, having returned in the morning from his 3-day absence, having run all over town, and having dined at Yulia Mikhailovna's, Peter Stepanovich came at last in the evening to Varvara Petrovna, who was awaiting him impatiently. The ban had been lifted. Nikolai Vsevolatovich was receiving. Varvara Petrovna herself led the guest to the door of the study. She had long wanted this meeting, and Peter Stepanovich gave her his word that he would run to her from Nicholas and recount it all. She timidly knocked for Nikolai Vsevolatovich, and getting no answer, ventured to open the door a couple of inches. "Nicholas, may I bring Peter Stepanovich in?" she asked softly and restrainedly, trying to make Nikolai Vsevolatovich out behind the lamp. You may, of course you may," Peter Stepanovich himself cried loudly and gaily, opened the door with his own hand, and walked in. I like the other version of this one better, so we're going to swap translations midway. Go to Andrew Armick Andrew. Let's go for the beginning just for fun. At 7 in the evening, Nikolai Stavrogin was sitting alone in his study. He'd always liked that room with its high ceilings, rugs, and rather heavy furniture from an earlier age. He sat on a couch in one corner, dressed to go out, but he seemed to have no intention of going anywhere. A lamp burned on the desk in front of him, its shade cutting off the light so that the corners on the far side of the large room were in darkness. He seemed to be deep in thought, absorbed and preoccupied. His face was drawn and tired. His cheek was indeed swollen, but the rumor that one of his teeth had been knocked out had been an exaggeration. It had only been loosened and now was firm in its socket again. The cut inside his upper lip had healed too. As to the swelling, it had lasted a whole week because Stavrogin had refused to see a doctor and have it lanced, waiting for it to go down by itself. Neither would he let his mother come near him. She was allowed in only once a day for about 1 minute, and then only after dark. He didn't even receive Peter Verkovinsky, although Peter dropped in on Mrs. Stavrogin at least 2 or 3 times a day, as long as he remained in town. And then on Monday, having returned in the morning from his 3-day trip, having rushed all over town and then dined at Mrs. von Lempke's, Peter turned up in the evening at Mrs. Stavrogin's. She had been expecting him impatiently. He was informed that the ban had been lifted and Nikolai was receiving visitors. Mrs. Stavrogin herself accompanied the guest to the door of her son's study. She was anxious for the 2 men to have a talk, for Peter had promised to report the gist of the conversation to her. She knocked timidly on the door of the study and, receiving no answer, decided to open it a couple of inches. "Nikolai," she said in a low, constrained voice, trying to catch sight of him through the crack in the door. May I let Peter Verkovensky in? Of course you may, Peter himself answered in a loud, cheerful voice. He opened the door wider and stepped into the room. Stavrogin hadn't heard the knock on the door, and although he had heard his mother's shy voice, he had had no time to answer it. On the desk in front of him was a letter he had just read and about which he had been thinking intensely. Peter's loud voice startled him. Quickly, he covered the letter with a paperweight he happened to have at hand. A corner of the letter and almost all the envelope stuck out from under it. I shouted like that to give you time, Peter said quickly, in a tone of remarkable innocence, hurrying over to the desk and staring at the paperweight. And of course you noticed that I was hiding a letter I had just received, Stavrogin said quietly without moving. A letter? Ah, but why should that concern me? Peter explained. But, he whispered, indicating the door with his head. It was now closed tight. She never listens from behind doors, Stavrogin said coldly. And even if she did, I'd have no objections, Peter said loudly and cheerfully, installing himself in an easy chair. But tonight I want to have a little face-to-face talk with you now that I've finally got to see you. First of all, how do you feel? You look fine to me. Perhaps you'll be able to appear tomorrow, Perhaps. Put their minds at rest. At last, and mine too, Peter said, gesticulating wildly but in a fond and jocular tone. You've no idea what nonsense I've had to feed them all this time, although I suppose you really do have some idea, he laughed. I don't have any clear idea. I only heard from Mother that you were quite busy. Me? No, nothing special, Peter cried, as if defending himself from a grave accusation. You know, I brought up Shatov's wife, that is the rumors about your affair with her in Paris. That could, of course, explain what happened on that Sunday. You don't mind, do you? I'm sure you've been giving your all. Just as I feared. Anyway, what do you mean by giving my all? Sounds like a reproach. On the other hand, you seem willing to face things squarely. On the way, I was afraid you wouldn't be. I don't particularly feel like facing anything squarely, Stavrogin said, visibly irritated. But then he laughed. No, that's not what I have in mind. Make no mistake about that, Peter said, waving his hands, his words rattling like peas in a drum. He appeared pleased at his host's irritability. I won't bother you with our common business now, considering your present state. I only came to talk about the Sunday incident, and only as much as is absolutely necessary, for it's impossible to let it go at that, after all. I've come to offer a frank explanation that I probably need even more than you do. Maybe that does your pride good. But it's also the truth. From now on, I will always be completely frank with you. Haven't you been all along? You know very well that I haven't, that I've sometimes twisted things around a bit. Now you're smiling. I'm glad, for it is a pretext for a frank explanation. I provoked that smile deliberately by using the phrase twisted things around. I know you're angry at me for taking the liberty of presenting you with a distorted picture of the truth, but now I will follow it up with an explanation of my behavior. You see how open I've become. All right, then, would you like to hear what I have to say? Stavrogin's expression, which had remained scornfully detached, even sarcastic, throughout his visitor's obvious attempts to irritate him with his carefully prepared, crudely naive insolence, at last showed a trace of uneasy curiosity. Listen, then, Peter began, wriggling more than ever. When I came to this town about 10 days ago, I had, of course, to adopt a certain role. Let's add that to the stage direction. Peter briefly scrubbed at his lenses of his glasses. Now, you may say, why not be oneself, right? But there's nothing more difficult than being oneself. No one believes you. I admit I thought of playing the fool because it is much easier to be a fool than to be oneself. But on the other hand, a fool is an extreme, and extremes provoke curiosity. So finally I decided definitely to be myself. Well, but what is my own character? It is the golden mean, neither stupid nor intelligent, and rather ungifted. Furthermore, I've dropped from the moon, as the respectable people have here put it. That may all be quite right, Stavrogin said with a faint smile. Ah, so you agree. Good. I thought that was your opinion of me. Please don't worry, I'm not in the least offended. I didn't say those things about myself to make you protest politely and say, oh no, you're really talented and intelligent, that sort of thing. You know, you're smiling again. You've caught me out again. You wouldn't have said you're intelligent. So, all right, but I have to assume everything. Passons, as my papa says. And also, parenthetically, Forgive my prolixity. That, by way, is an example. I always talk a lot. That is, I use a lot of words in a hurry, and the result is not too brilliant. Now, why is that? It's because I don't know how to talk. People who speak well use fewer words, so I lack talent. Isn't that right? But since this lack of talent is a part of my nature, shouldn't I exploit it as best I can? So I exploit it. True, on my way here, I thought I'd try being silent. But keeping quiet is a great talent, so it's beyond my reach. And then silence is always a little dangerous. So I decided that the best course would be to talk a lot, very fast, persuade, plead, and do it all in the most untalented way and get all tangled up in my own arguments in the end so my audience would walk away from me shrugging or rather spitting in disgust. In the final analysis, I'd have convinced them of my frankness, bored them to death, and left them without any idea of what it was I was trying to say, thus attaining all three of my objectives. Who, after all, would suspect me of plotting and conspiring? Any one of them would have been personally offended with anyone who told them that I had some secret schemes. Furthermore, I can make them laugh occasionally, and that presents tremendous advantages. Now they'll forgive me anything, if only because the wise guy who published all those revolutionary pamphlets has turned out to be even more stupid than they are themselves. Judging by your smile, you approve. Am I right? Stavrogin, however, wasn't smiling at all. In fact, he was frowning rather impatiently. What? Did you say it made no difference? Peter went rattling on again at great speed, although Stavrogin hadn't said a word. Please, I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not here to compromise you by association with me. You know, you're terribly touchy today. I came here cheerfully with an open heart, but you've been trying to find something wrong with every word I've said. I promise I won't bring up any slippery subjects today. You have my word on it. And I subscribe to all your conditions in advance. Stavrogin maintained his stubborn silence. What? Did you say something? I believe I've blundered again. You never set any conditions and never will. All right, I believe you. You can relax. I know myself that it's no use setting conditions for me. Isn't that right? I'm talking for both of us now. I believe, but you'll have to forgive my lack of imagination. Remember, it all comes from my lack of talent. You're laughing? Why, what's the matter? Nothing, Stavrogin snorted. I just remembered that I once said you were a rather mediocre person, but I don't believe you were present, so it must have been repeated to you. Now, I would appreciate it very much if you would come quickly to the point. But I'm there already. To be precise, I'm on the subject of the Sunday incident. Now, what part was I playing on Sunday, would you say? Well, I lost my place. Well, I think I impersonated a mediocrity in a hurry and captured everyone's attention by drowning them in my mediocre conversation. But they forgave me because in the first place, I had landed from the moon, as they all seem to agree here. And in the second place, because I told a nice little story and got you nicely off the hook. Doesn't that describe my role? That is, you told the story in such a way as to leave doubt as to its veracity and to suggest that we were acting on a prearranged plan, whereas there was no such plan. And I never asked you to do anything of the sort. Precisely, Peter exclaimed delightedly. I arranged it so everyone could see the strings behind it, but surely you realize that I put on that show mainly for you because I was trying to catch you off balance and compromise you. I wanted, above all, to find out how afraid you were. I wonder why you should be so frank with me now. Don't be angry. Don't glare at me like that. You wonder why I'm being so frank with you? Well, just because everything's changed now. Finished, over with, and buried. My opinion of you has suddenly changed. The old methods are discarded. I'll never again compromise you by the old methods. From now on, I'll use new ones. Change of tactics. No tactics at all. From now on, I leave it entirely up to you. If you wish, it's yes. If you don't, it's no. That's my new line. As to our common concern, I won't breathe a sound until you bring it up yourself. Does that make you laugh? I hope you enjoy laughing. I'd like to join you in it. But now I'm absolutely serious about what I've said, although it's quite obvious that only a man without talent can always be in so much of a hurry. Isn't that right? Anyway, talented or not, I mean what I just said seriously. And indeed, he looked serious and spoke in a very different tone now. Stavrogin even thought he detected a strange emotion in his voice and gave him a curious look. So you've changed your opinion of me, he asked. I changed my opinion of you the instant you took your hands off Shatov's shoulders then. But that's enough. Quite enough. And please don't ask me any more questions. I won't say anything more. He jumped up, waving his hands as if to brush any possible questions away, but since none were forthcoming, and he was in no special hurry to leave, he sank into the easy chair again. And by the way, allow me to inform you parenthetically, he rattled on as soon as he had resumed his seat, that some of the citizens here are chattering away, something to the effect that you'll kill him. Lemke was on the point of alerting the police, but his wife protested. But that's enough of that. I just thought I'd let you know. And another thing, I moved the Lebetkins across the river, that same day. Did you receive my note with their address? Yes. Well, I did that out of sincere zeal, rather than because of my mediocrity. If the result was not very brilliant, it was at least well meant. Well, I don't know. Perhaps it was the proper thing to do, Stavrogin said thoughtfully. Only please stop sending me notes. I had to send that one. So Laputin knows? Couldn't be helped. But you know yourself that he wouldn't dare. Incidentally, it would be a good thing if we went to see our people. I mean them. Not our people, in case you wish again to find fault with everything I say. Well, don't worry. I didn't mean just now, but sometime. I'll let them know. They'll meet some evening and we'll go over. They're waiting with their mouths open like little birds in a nest for us to arrive at the hotel. They're a hot-headed lot. They have their books out and are preparing to start a debate. Virginsky the Cosmopolitan and Laputin the Fourierist with the talents of a sleuth. That one is a valuable man in some respects, but otherwise requires rough treatment. Then there's that long-eared fellow who will expound his own system to us. And they're rather offended because I'm sort of neglecting them and, as it were, cooling them off by pouring cold water over them. Really, we ought to go and see them. And you're trying to pass me off as some sort of leader among them, Stavrogin asked as casually as he could. By the way, Peter said quickly, trying to drown out the question and acting as if he hadn't heard. You know that I've been seeing your mother up to 3 times a day, and on those occasions I've had to do plenty of talking. I can well imagine. You don't have to imagine anything. I simply assured her that you had not the slightest intention of killing anyone, and said other sweet things. But what do you think of her knowing the very next day that I'd taken Maria across the river? Was it you who told her? Never thought of telling her. I thought it couldn't be you. Who could it be then? I wonder. Laputin, for sure. No, not Laputin, Peter mumbled, frowning. But I'll find out who it was. Looks as though it might have been Shatov. But let's leave it for the moment. Although it's really very important. By the way, I kept expecting your mother to come out with the key question at any moment. Ah, yes, all this time she's looked so gloomy and sad, but when I came today, she was all smiles and sunshine. Why? Because I promised her I'd go and ask Liza to marry me in 5 days, Stavrogin said with unexpected frankness. Yes, of course I see, Peter muttered as if embarrassed. There's some talk about her being engaged to someone else, of course, but you're right. She'd come running to you. Right from the church if you whistled. I hope you don't mind my saying so. I don't mind. I'm beginning to realize that it's extremely difficult to make you lose your temper today, and I'm becoming afraid of you. I'm very curious to know how you'll present yourself to them. I bet you've got a lot of tricks up your sleeve for the occasion. You don't mind my saying so? Stavrogin didn't bother to answer, which exasperated Peter even more. By the way, were you in earnest when you told your mother you'd propose to Liza? Stavrogin gave him a cold, scrutinizing look. I see, it was only to reassure her, of course. And suppose I really meant it, Stavrogin asked firmly. Why, in that case, God bless you, as they say on such occasions. Won't harm the cause. Note that I didn't say our cause, because I know you don't like the word our. As for me, why, I'm at your service, you know that. So that's what you think? I think nothing, Peter said hurriedly with a laugh, because I realize very well that you've thought out everything concerning your affairs in advance. And as I said, I'm at your service always and everywhere and under any circumstances. Yes, any circumstances. You understand that, don't you? Stavrogin yawned. Ah, you must be tired of me, Peter cried, suddenly jumping to his feet and seizing his brand new Homburg. He seemed about to leave, but then he didn't. He poured forth a stream of words, either standing in the middle of the room or pacing up and down and occasionally slapping his knee with his hat for greater emphasis. I thought I might tell you something about the Lemks. That would amuse you, he announced cheerfully. No, some other time. How's Mrs. von Lemke, by the way? Ah, what an exquisite display of manners. You care about her just as much as you care about an alley cat. Nevertheless, you feel duty-bound to inquire. I think it very praiseworthy. Well, I can assure you she's quite all right, regards you with a kind of awe, and has an almost superstitious expectation of great things from you. She doesn't mention Sunday's incident and is certain that you'll emerge with flying colors from it when you put in your first appearance. I tell you, she thinks you can do anything you want to do. You're more mysterious and romantic than ever, and that makes a very useful situation. They're all anxious for you to appear. When I left, the atmosphere was pretty hot, and now it's even hotter. And by the way, thanks again for that letter. They're all afraid of Count K. I think they take you for a secret government agent, and I encourage them to believe it. Hope you don't mind. Doesn't bother me. It will come in very useful later on. You see, they have their own ways here, and I, of course, encourage that. Mrs. von Lemke in the first place, then Gaganov. That makes you laugh? But you know my line. I go around spinning inane yarns, but now and then I blurt out something intelligent that happens to be just what they're groping for. Then, as they flock around me, I begin to lie again. They give up on me. The fellow's quite able, they say, but he's dropped from the moon. Lemke invited me to join his administration to straighten me out. You know, I'm treating him horribly. That is, I'm discrediting him glaringly, but he just stares at me. His wife encourages me. And Gaganov, by the way, is very angry with you. The other day at his Dukovo estate, he spoke of you in very deprecating terms. So, of course, I told him the whole truth. Well, not the whole truth, of course, but still the truth. I stayed at Dukovo for an entire day. A fine estate, and a beautiful house, too. What, is he at Dukovo now? Stavrogin asked, suddenly stirring and jerking forward in his seat. No, he drive me to town himself this morning, Peter said, as though he hadn't noticed Stavrogin's sudden agitation. Oh, I'm sorry, I've knocked something down. Is it a book? He bent down and picked up an illustrated luxury edition. Balzac's Women, with pictures too. He opened it. Never read it. You know, Lemke also writes novels. Really? Stavrogin asked, sounding interested. He writes in Russian, and it's a secret, although Mrs. von Lemke knows about it and approves. He's an old shoe, but he has a few tricks up his sleeve. They have it worked out very carefully. Everything is strict, neat, and handled with great self-restraint. I wish we had something like that working for us. Sounds as though you admire the methods used by the government. How can I help admiring them? Our government's methods are the only thing that is really natural to Russia and the only methods that can succeed here. All right, I won't, he cried suddenly. That wasn't what I wanted to talk about. I won't say another word on that delicate subject. But I suppose I'd better go. You look positively green. I'm feverish. I can believe it. Why don't you stretch out? By the way, we have some members of the Skopsy sect in our district. Must be curious to belong to a sect that goes in for castration, don't you think? But I'll tell you about it later. I have a funny little story for you, though. There's an infantry regiment stationed in the district. On Friday evening, I was drinking with the officers. We have 3 friends among them. You understand? We talked about atheism, and you can be sure that God was badly demoted. They liked it. They squealed with joy. By the way, Shatov insists that if an uprising were started in Russia, it would have to begin with atheism. Maybe he's right. There was a gruff, white-haired old captain among them. He sat in silence, but then he suddenly got up, stood in the middle of the room, and said aloud, but as though he were talking to himself, "If there were no God, how could I be a captain?" Then he picked up his cap, shrugged, and walked out. He expressed a quite logical proposition, Stavrogin said, yawning for the third time. "You think so?" "I didn't understand, and I meant to ask you." "Well, what else is there?" That Shpigulin factory is interesting. It employs 500 workers. As you know, it's a hotbed of cholera and hasn't been cleaned for 50 years. And the workers are underpaid by the millionaire owners. I assure you, some of the workers have even heard about the International. What, that makes you smile? You'll see for yourself. Just give me the tiniest amount of time. I asked you for time before, but I must ask for you for some more. But I'm sorry, I won't. I didn't mean to speak about it. Don't frown, please. Goodbye. Oh, how could I forget, he said, coming back. I was forgetting the most important thing. They've just informed me that our suitcase has arrived from Petersburg. What do you mean? Stavrogin asked, looking at him without understanding. Why, the one with your clothes in it, of course. Your frock coat, trousers, and underwear. Is it true that it's arrived? Yes, they mentioned something about its arriving this morning. May I have it now? Ask Alexei. All right, tomorrow. How about tomorrow? Because among your clothes, there's my coat, frock coat, and 3 pairs of trousers that were ordered at Chalmers on your recommendation, remember? I heard that you were trying to pass yourself off as a dandy around here, Stavrogin said with a snort. Is it true that you even intend to take riding lessons? Peter smiled crookedly. I'll tell you what, he said hurriedly, his voice quivering and faltering. Let's both avoid personal remarks once and for all. Of course, you're free to despise me as much as you like and to laugh to your heart's content, but I wish you would try to stop making personal remarks for the time being. All right, I won't say it again, Stavrogin said. Peter smiled, slapped his knee with his hat, and shifted from one foot to the other. He seemed to have completely recovered his composure. Some people here even consider me your rival for Liza, so how can I help being interested in my appearance? He said, laughing. But I'd like to know where you get so much information, It's 8 already. I must be on my way. I promised to drop in on your mother for a moment, but I think I'll skip it this time. And you, go to bed and cheer up. Outside it's dark and raining and the streets are not too safe at night. But I have a horse cab waiting for me. Oh, by the way, somewhere around this town there's a convict, Fedka, roving about, who was formerly, believe it or not, a serf of mine. My dear papa shoved him into the army about 15 years ago, and the army even paid him for it. A very interesting character indeed. Have you spoken to him? I have. He's not hiding from me. He's prepared to do anything, for money, of course. But he has convictions too, although rather peculiar ones, I must say. Ah, yes, again, by the way, if you were serious earlier about you and Liza, let me state again that I'm also a man ready for anything, whatever it may be, and entirely at your service. What are you doing? Why are you reaching for your stick? Oh, you weren't reaching for it. Imagine I thought you were reaching for that stick of yours. Stavrogin wasn't reaching for anything, nor did he say anything. He did get up, though, and his face twitched strangely. Also, if you feel something should be done about Mr. Gaganov, Peter suddenly blurted out, pointing directly at the paperweight. I could, of course, arrange everything. In fact, I'm certain you couldn't manage without me. Without waiting for an answer, he quickly walked out of the room, but then his head reappeared in the crack of the door. I say that, he rattled off at full speed, because Shatov, for instance, had no right to risk his life either when he attacked you on Sunday.